Typhoon brought these two together. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to find out more about these Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
This week on the Bearded Theologians, we're going to talk about the studying of Scripture. And we also recognize this is another one of those topics, kind of like last week, where we could spend hours upon hours on this. And but we're only going to try to keep our short 15 minutes on this. And so bear in mind that there'll be more to this conversation, and we want to encourage you to keep the conversations going after we have finished. But we have a great show for you today. And so, Zach, I'll start the question with you. How do you look at studying Scripture?
Man, it's one of those things that's been ongoing in my life and in my ministry. I'm not a big fan of reading, so it's always been a struggle for me to get there and to really dig in for myself personally. Now, to study for a Bible study or a sermon or anything like that, that's no problem. So that's been one of the struggles that I had. I kind of want to be honest in that and transparent where I've been, both personally and professionally. And so I've had to get creative on how I study Scripture and the ways that I go and find resources and make it continue to be interesting for me. So I found a few printed resources that I use. The Barclay Bible study stuff that's been around for a long time are one of my favorite things to use, as well as I have a few websites and blogs that I also use to dig into that as well. So for me, it's been just being creative and finding ways that are really interesting to me, knowing that sitting down, cracking open a book, and just digging in aren't always fun.
For me, I actually like to I do Lectio when I do my study of Scripture, and so I'll spend a lot of time just doing the Lectio Divina, which is sacred reading, where you read a section of Scripture like about 3 times and just meditate on what God is speaking to you. That's how I spend a lot of my morning, is doing that. I'm actually entering in a time now in the next several weeks. We're doing covenant Bible study here at our church, and so I've entered into a covenant with some groups of people, and so my approach is going to change a little bit differently, and I'm going to adhere to that study side and allow God's word to speak through to me and through me. But then as this isn't coinciding with any kind of sermon series or anything that I'm doing. And so I'm going to have to kind of bulk up a little bit more and, not only study the Scripture that I'm preaching on, but then the Bible study and then just the devotional reading. I'm kind of like you. I actually have it set on my phone on the Bible app to ding every morning a certain set of Scripture. And so what I've decided to do is that's going to be the Scripture that I Lectio with, and then I'll have my Bible study reading and then my Scripture reading for Sunday morning, and just really utilize Scripture throughout my whole day. And I think that the more opportunities we open ourselves up to Scripture, the more it can speak to us, so it can speak through us.
Oh, no doubt. One of the things that I'm really excited about with starting my seminary work here in a couple of weeks is I got a couple of classes where that's the expectation, that we do our spiritual development a little bit different, that we dig into Scripture personally a little bit different, and try new ways and try different ways to kind of spark that and keep that spiritual life going, since pouring into sermons, pouring into Bible studies, pouring into seminary takes so much. They're really intentional about making sure we take care of ourselves in doing that in a way that's exciting and a little bit different. So I'm looking forward to those ways. Like I said, the Lectio that's a great one. It's one of my favorites as well. I don't do it as often as others, but it's certainly good. And there's a lot of different ways and different things out there for folks.
And I'm very to the line on the Methodist side of things, that I believe that the Bible contains all that is necessary for salvation, and I utilize that. It's something that's very important to me. Scripture is very important to me, and I definitely utilize the Methodist quadrilateral, with scripture, tradition, experience, and reason. And so you always need to be careful when you're looking at scripture. I think far too often, and we talked about this a little bit in our kind of little pre-conversation, was, how often is it that one verse just gets used over and over and over again? I think the most used verse at graduation time is Jeremiah 29:11. And, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that used in baccalaureates or, whatever kind of graduation time speeches. And when I preached baccalaureate this year in the town, I actually refused to use that verse. And I actually went with a whole different story. I went with the story of Peter walking on the water, which is a whole different perspective than what you would think. And I think that we have to be aware of that, is that how often like a bumper sticker or a t-shirt only shows one side of the story, and we really need to look at the whole story. My brother-in-law, one of the things that he does on Sunday mornings is when he looks at what I've put in the bulletin, he will actually read the whole chapter around it to get a better sense of context and stuff. And I was like, man, that's awesome, because I think it was when I read Joel the other day, he was like, man, that's messed up. Some of the stuff that you didn't read this Sunday, I mean, I don't know how you'd been able to preach that if you would have read that. And so the more that we can look deeper into scripture and we don't get hung up on those verses that we've, clung near and dear to our hearts, the more that we look at the larger picture of how God is at work in the world, I think we'll be amazed at how God speaks to us through that scripture. And then I also feel that studying in a group is desperately important when we study scripture, that studying it alone kind of can hinder us a little bit. It can keep us from really growing and maybe what the Spirit may be saying to us.
I had a conversation with a guy earlier this week, and he was asking about picking up our cross and going, and what does that really mean, and what do we get there? And my question to him was, what did you read before and after that piece of scripture? What did you dig into it further than that one little verse? And he went away and he came back and he was like, okay, I get it now. He'd gone through and read more of that chapter, more of that section. And, it really kind of he was like, when I dig into scripture like this, I got to dig into it more. I got to read more than just the one verse. We're running through the book of Jonah this month through my sermon series. I can't tell you how many people who have come up and said, I've never read chapter 4. I've always stopped after Jonah's swallowed by the whale. We learn these little Sunday school lessons and we forget that there's more to the story, that there's more that happens, that Jonah doesn't come out of this story clean. He's still got his things. He's still messy. And, it's been fun watching people read through that and realize, oh man, it was more than just Jonah going to Nineveh. It was more than just Jonah being swallowed by a fish or a whale or whatever you want to call it. There's more to that story. And, I kind of feel like, as we dig into it and read it and study it, that Nineveh's radical conversion and God's mercy and their hope through all of that is a bigger story than Jonah running around being Jonah. But it's fun to dig into those stories.
You mean in children's Sunday school they don't tell the rest of the story of Noah, and after he gets off the boat, he goes on a bender and gets drunk,
drunk and naked, man, versus his family.
But I have to admit, if I was on a boat that long with my family and a bunch of animals, I that might be something to consider. But
I'm not saying Noah wasn't justified in that. I'm just saying we don't talk about it.
Yeah, we just don't talk about it. Or,
right.
One of my favorite stories in the Gospels that never really gets talked about, especially in farming communities like I've been in, is the story when Jesus sends the demon in the pigs, and the pigs go off the cliff, and the people get really mad because their livelihood just literally jumped off a cliff and killed themselves. And right. Jesus is like literally ran out of town because he literally totally took out a whole social financial spectrum for a family or for families. And it's just like, we don't talk about those scriptures, and it's amazing to see what doesn't get talked about in worship. And this led me to one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And it was actually because I read it. It stirred up when I was reading a book. I can't remember the book. It had something to do with Methodism. It was The People or something. I'll find it later and maybe I'll remember it. But it talked about the difference in the difference between worship and small group, and that worship is to inspire and to send us out, and that small group is that time where we really get intimate with scripture and really get that time of conversation with people. And I know that there are a lot of great sermons out there that spend time on the scriptures and talk about the scriptures, but how often in those conversations is it just one-sided and it's just the preacher just giving you what he feels like you need to hear, versus actually pushing the preacher on what he said, or and having that true study conversation. And I think that that's why that's important, especially when it comes to scripture. It's great that I read it alone, and I enjoy that side. I enjoy my Lexio time, but I also need, as I'm reading scripture, I need someone to press me and to stretch me on it, and to ask questions, maybe to ask a question that maybe I didn't see in the scripture, and to really think about that. That's why I'm really looking forward to the study time that I'm going to start having here soon, because I think it's going to allow me to grow deeper in that. And that's the thing that I think far too often, especially in this society, that we've made it so convenient that we have forgotten how important it is to spend time together in a group to figure out what it's saying.
No, I agree with you. One of my favorite Bible studies I've ever done in my ministry was that we just sat down. We sat down and just took scripture. We started, I think the very first one we did, we were there a year and a half, and we started with Matthew and went through Matthew scripture by scripture and talked about it and pushed each other. Why did Jesus say this? Why did the disciples do this? How can they act like that? And got into the details and got into those tough questions. And, some of the best conversations, some of the best discipleship that I got to do was out of that group. And it's fun. And in that, it was people who had spent all their life doing Bible studies, being in the church for the most part. And then there were some that were digging into it for the first time. And what they found was there's some humor in the Bible. There's some serious parts in the Bible. There's some things that we can take and have a whole lot of fun with. And then there's some things that we can take and struggle with. I struggle with people when they're like, oh, the Bible's boring. Have you read it? Because there's a lot there. Some of it is boring. Yeah, I'll give you that. But man, God's funny. He does some funny and says some funny things. And people's reactions, man, I love it. Matt, Peter's one of my favorite people because he just, at least I don't think Peter and Matthew like each other. Because Matthew just gives them a bad rap in his book. Anytime there's a question, anytime the disciples didn't understand, it's Peter in the background going, Jesus, I don't get it. And I find humor in that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think, like, for me, one of the coolest things I've done in a church was when I was at McFarland, we did Bible in 90 days, and we did that as a whole church. And while it was a challenge, what I discovered in reading that and going through the 12 pages every day, that it was amazing to what God was saying to our community, to our individuals and the people that were really going through it. It was kind of like this shared experience. Like, yeah, it was almost like we could get B90 tattoos on us because we had made it through. And I think it was 95. I think it took me 95 days. I think I did take a couple extra days because I got behind a little bit, but I found that practice very life-giving, and and that might be something you look into. The Bible in 90 Days study is a great study. I had a great time really digging deep into scripture in a sense of just reading it every day. 12 pages a day was very, very fun, but I don't just read the same scripture over and over again. And I think far too often we get in that rut that we're just going to read the Gospels and we don't look into Second Kings or Song of Solomon or Philemon or, some of those other obscure books that we don't ever look at because, we're too afraid of them, and to dig in. And I think that the more we dig into the word, our lives will be shaped and changed in such a way that God will be able to work on us, to work through us.
I think so too. And I think that's our encouragement for everybody today is man, don't give up on the the old scriptures, the ones that we cling to, but expand on them. Go a little deeper. Read the rest of Daniel. Read the middle part of Genesis. Go and dig out some of the minor prophets and read their stories, because they're obviously important because they're there. We have something to learn from them. Read the chapter before and after your favorite scripture. Dig into it a little more. And I think that's definitely our encouragement for you guys today, and have the conversation of, what'd you find out new today? Where did you see humor? What made you ask a question that you normally wouldn't ask, because you just never got that far in the scripture? You stopped at your favorite, or stopped at what, that special one. So that's what we want to do. We want to encourage you to find those ways to be creative, to dig into scripture a little bit more, to have the conversation, to be in community with people, and not just get in the church on Sunday morning and hear what the pastor has to say and then go about your business. We want to encourage you to have those conversations with us, with your pastor, with your friends, with your small groups, with your family, whoever have the conversation with you. We want you to have the conversation. We certainly want to have the conversation with you here through our social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, through our website. Something really cool that's coming up. Matt and I are going to be in person again. We're going to be joining each other in a handful of other United Methodists and Methodists from across the globe at the World Methodist Conference in Houston this next week. So you guys can see some extra special guests on our show, on the podcast. We've got some exciting people lined up. You should see some live content come through on Facebook as we're flying in and out and going and doing things. So be excited for that. And we're really excited to invade Houston and do some podcasty things there. We want to thank you guys for checking us out on Facebook. We're over 350 followers, and we can't do that without you. So thank you for that. We also want to encourage you to go to our website, beardtheologians.com, check out our store, buy a mug, buy a shirt. Every little bit of money helps us go to do this just a little bit better and for a little bit longer. Again, we can't do it without you listening and supporting us in this way and having these conversations with us. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Zach Bechtold.
And I'm Matt Franks.
And we thank you for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.